Gilded chains. You're not wearing that. Josephine Wright stood in front of the mirror, fingers tracing the delicate beadwork on the scarlet gown she'd been eyeing for months. The designer sample had finally arrived at her studio apartment, and the moment she'd slipped it on, she knew. The dress seemed made for her, a waterfall of crimson silk that emphasized every curve, while the plunging back revealed just enough skin to be daring without crossing into inappropriate. Roman, it's for the Vanguard Awards. Everyone will be dressed like this, she said, meeting his reflection in the mirror. Roman Blackwood adjusted his platinum cufflinks, his jaw tightening the way it always did when she challenged him. At 34, he'd already built Black Sphere Technologies into a multi-billion-dollar empire. His dark eyes scanned her from head to toe, assessing her like he might evaluate a business acquisition. The nominee's partners will be dressed appropriately, he replied, voice deceptively soft. That dress is making a statement I don't want associated with my name. It's just a dress, Josephine argued, though she knew it wasn't. The gown represented everything she'd dreamed of before meeting Roman: creative freedom, bold choices, the courage to stand out in an industry where uniqueness was currency. He moved behind her, hands settling on her shoulders. His touch was gentle, but she felt the familiar weight of his expectations pressing down on her. Joe, you know how these tech investors are. Old-fashioned, conservative. His fingers traced the exposed line of her spine. You're stunning, too stunning. I need them focused on my presentation, not my girlfriend's back. Once, those possessive words would have made her heart flutter. 16 months ago, when Roman Blackwood had walked into the gallery where she was showcasing her first collection, Josephine had been dazzled. A self-made billionaire interested in her work, in her. Their whirlwind romance had been intoxicating. Private jets to Paris, a key to his penthouse after just 3 months, introductions to investors who might fund her designs. But lately, his compliments came wrapped in corrections. His suggestions felt like commands. His protectiveness had morphed into something that left less and less room for her to breathe. I'll have Vivian find you something more suitable, he said, already reaching for his phone. Maybe that blue Valentino you wore to the charity dinner. Everyone said you looked elegant. Elegant. Appropriate. Suitable. Words that had become her prison. Josephine stepped away from his touch, catching the flicker of surprise in his eyes. Roman wasn't used to her creating distance. I saved for 3 months to afford this dress, she said quietly, and I offered to buy you an entire wardrobe. You're the one who insists on this independence kick. His tone was patient, as if explaining something obvious to a child. What's mine is yours, Joe. What's mine is yours. But never the reverse, she realized. What was hers? Her creativity, her choices, her identity, those were negotiable. The dress isn't appropriate, he repeated, attention already shifting to his watch. We need to leave in an hour. The car will be waiting. Standing there in the scarlet silk that made her feel powerful for the first time in months, Josephine faced a simple truth. She could remove this dress today, but tomorrow there would be another restriction, another piece of herself she'd be asked to surrender. You're right, she said, reaching for the zipper. It isn't appropriate. Roman nodded, satisfied, already distracted by something on his phone. He didn't notice the quiet resolve forming in her eyes as she carefully hung the forbidden dress in her closet. He didn't see her hands trembling, not with submission, but with the first stirrings of rebellion. Tomorrow, she would wear the blue Valentino. She would smile at his investors and play the perfect partner, but in 31 days, when her name was on the lease of her own studio and her first independent collection was secured, Josephine Wright would wear whatever she damn well pleased. Breaking free 2 years could transform a person entirely, and Josephine Wright was living proof. She stood in her sun-drenched atelier in Chelsea, surrounded by the fruits of her liberation, seamstresses busy at work, design boards covered with her upcoming collection, and fashion magazine covers featuring her distinctive aesthetic. Her brand, Phoenix Rising, had become synonymous with empowered femininity, designs that celebrated rather than constrained. The final confirmation just came through, announced Olivia, her assistant. You're officially headlining the Luminous Gala's fashion showcase. Josephine paused, her sketch pad hovering above the workbench. Luminous? You mean the Black Sphere Foundation Gala? Olivia nodded, eyes widening as she realized the connection. Oh, that's Roman Blackwood's charity, isn't it? We can decline if— No, Josephine interrupted, surprising herself with her steadiness. We won't decline. Phoenix belongs on that stage. Later that evening, alone in her loft apartment, paid for entirely with her own success, Josephine opened a garment bag in the back of her closet. Inside lay the scarlet dress, unworn but preserved perfectly, a monument to the moment she recognized her gilded cage for what it was. The day after Roman had forbidden her from wearing it, she had packed 3 suitcases and left his penthouse while he was in Tokyo closing a deal. Her goodbye note had been simple. I need air to breathe and space to grow. I hope one day you'll understand why I couldn't stay. His response had been equally predictable. First came the extravagant apologies disguised as gifts, then the cold business maneuvering when she refused to return. Black Sphere had suddenly withdrawn interest in the fashion technology platform that had been courting her designs. 2 potential investors mysteriously backed out of meetings with her fledgling brand. But Josephine had anticipated this. The day she left, she had already secured enough independent backing to weather 6 months of development. When his economic warfare failed to bring her back, Roman had simply disappeared from her world. Though his shadow occasionally loomed in the business pages, she scrutinized religiously. Now, running her fingers over the scarlet silk, Josephine made her decision. The dress would finally have its debut, redesigned and elevated by her now expert hands, transformed just as she had been. Meanwhile, across town in his minimalist penthouse overlooking Central Park, Roman Blackwood reviewed the final guest list for the Luminous Gala. Black Sphere's latest neural interface technology had doubled his already staggering fortune, and the charity gala was positioned to be both philanthropic triumph and technological showcase. Sir, the committee has finalized the featured designer for the evening, his new assistant noted, sliding a folder across his desk. Roman barely glanced at it, more concerned with the tech demonstration scheduled for the event's climax. As long as they're up to standard, it's Phoenix Rising. Quite the coup, actually. They rarely do corporate events. His fingers froze over the tablet. Phoenix Rising, Josephine's brand. The one that had gone from industry footnote to fashion powerhouse in just 24 months, with designs that appeared on red carpets and presidential inaugurations alike. Who authorized this? He asked quietly. The foundation board voted, unanimously. Ms. Wright's connection to sustainable textiles aligns perfectly with this year's environmental focus. Roman dismissed his assistant with a curt nod, then moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled before him like a circuit board of light and shadow. He had built an empire that spanned continents, yet the one thing he couldn't acquire was the woman who had walked away. In those first months after Josephine left, anger had fueled his business aggression. When that failed to bring her back, he'd simply buried himself in acquisition after acquisition. Relationships had become transactional again, elegant women who understood the arrangement, who never challenged his control because they never got close enough to matter. But sometimes, in rare unguarded moments, Roman admitted to himself what he couldn't acknowledge publicly. Watching Josephine's meteoric rise from afar had been both painful and illuminating. She had flourished without him, while he had merely accumulated more wealth to fill the space she'd left behind. He opened his private server and accessed a folder he hadn't viewed in months. Photos of them together, at the Met Gala, in Santorini, laughing in the rain outside that little Italian restaurant in the village. He stopped at one particular image, Josephine in a blue Valentino dress, looking perfectly elegant, perfectly appropriate, and utterly constrained. Sir? His assistant had returned, hovering at the door. The event planner needs your final approval on the seating arrangements. Roman closed the folder, his decision made. Tell them I'll handle the head table personally. In 2 weeks, Josephine Wright would step into his domain again. This time, he would be prepared. This time, things would be different. What neither of them realized was just how different things would become. The entrance, the luminous gala, transformed the Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dendur into a technological wonderland. Holographic butterflies fluttered between ancient stone columns, while hidden projectors cast the illusion of stars across the ceiling. Roman had spared no expense, with each detail reflecting Blacksphere's marriage of cutting-edge innovation and timeless elegance. He circulated among New York's elite with practiced charm, tech billionaires, Hollywood royalty, political kingmakers, yet his attention remained fixed on the entrance. According to the schedule in his pocket, Josephine would arrive precisely at 9, just before her collection's showcase. Quite the spectacle. "Blackwood," commented Vincent Harrington, his chief competitor. "Though I hear the fashion exhibition is the real highlight tonight. This Phoenix designer has everyone buzzing." Roman merely smiled, sipping his whiskey. "The foundation supports exceptional talent in all fields." At exactly 9 o'clock, the museum's grand entrance illuminated. The ambient music faded, replaced by a haunting cello piece that Roman recognized instantly, Josephine's favorite composer. The crowd turned as one, conversations halting mid-sentence. She appeared like a vision in living flame. The scarlet dress had been transformed, elevated beyond its original design into something transcendent. The silk cascaded like liquid fire around her body, architectural precision meeting sensual flow. The once provocative back had been reimagined with an intricate latticework of ruby-colored crystals that caught the light with every movement, creating the illusion that Josephine was wrapped in embers. Roman's glass nearly slipped from his fingers. This wasn't just the dress he'd forbidden. This was that dress reborn through the lens of the confident, independent designer Josephine had become. She paused at the top of the stairs, cameras flashing around her. Then her eyes found his across the crowded room, and for one unguarded moment, Roman saw everything, her triumph, her nervousness, and something unresolved that still flickered between them. "Magnificent, isn't she?" said a voice beside him. Roman turned to find Eleonora Voss, the fashion editor whose early support had helped launch Phoenix Rising. "She always was." Yes, but not like this," Eleonora corrected. "This Josephine creates rather than conforms. You know, she once told me the most interesting story about that particular dress." Before Roman could respond, Josephine had descended into the crowd, immediately surrounded by admirers and industry heavyweights. She moved through the space with graceful authority, no longer the uncertain designer seeking validation but a creative force whose presence commanded the room. The next hour passed in excruciating slowness for Roman. Protocol demanded he remain with certain key investors, unable to approach Josephine as she prepared backstage for her showcase. From across the room, he watched her interact effortlessly with people who now treated her as an equal to him, perhaps even his superior in her domain. Finally, the moment arrived for his introduction speech. Standing at the podium, Roman faced the gathered elite, including Josephine now seated in the front row, composed and unreadable. "Innovation requires courage," he began, departing from his prepared text. "The courage to envision something that doesn't exist, and the greater courage to bring that vision to life despite obstacles." His eyes found hers. Sometimes those obstacles are external challenges. Other times, they're people who fail to recognize brilliance when it stands before them. A murmur rippled through the audience. This wasn't the polished corporate speech they'd expected. "Tonight's featured designer embodies that courage," Roman continued. "When I first met Josephine Wright, she was already creating beauty that challenged convention. What I failed to understand then was that true vision can't be directed or constrained. It can only be set free to reach its full potential." In the front row, Josephine's careful composure slipped. She hadn't expected this public acknowledgement, this admission of error. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my professional honor and personal privilege to present Phoenix Rising's revolutionary collection, Unbound." The lights dimmed, and Josephine rose to take her place backstage. As she passed Roman at the podium, their shoulders nearly touching, she whispered words only he could hear. "Pretty speech. But we both know words are the easy part." Then she was gone in a swirl of scarlet silk, leaving behind the subtle scent of jasmine and the weight of everything still unspoken between them. Roman returned to his seat, watching as the runway illuminated and models began showcasing Josephine's visionary collection. Each piece told a story of liberation, traditional constraints reimagined as elements of strength, restriction transformed into decoration rather than limitation. The final piece, modeled by Josephine herself in a surprise appearance, left the audience breathless. A wedding dress unlike any other, with a cape of shattered crystal that caught the light like ice breaking at sunrise, beauty emerging from destruction. As thunderous applause erupted, Roman finally admitted the truth he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He had never really known the woman he'd tried so desperately to possess. And now that he saw her clearly at last, he wondered if he'd lost his chance to truly love her. Reflections, the after-party sprawled across the museum's rooftop garden, Manhattan's skyline providing a glittering backdrop to celebration. Josephine moved through congratulations and business cards with practiced grace, though her mind remained fixated on Roman's unexpected words. His speech had cut through her carefully constructed armor, reaching something she'd buried beneath success and independence. "Champagne?" The familiar voice behind her sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Josephine turned to find Roman holding 2 flutes, his expression unreadable. She accepted one, maintaining careful distance. "Quite the event you've created. Quite the collection you've designed." His eyes held hers with an intensity that was achingly familiar. "The dress suits you. It always would have?" "It's not the same dress anymore," she replied. "I redesigned every element, except its essence." Roman gestured toward a quieter corner of the garden. 5 minutes of your valuable time?" Curiosity, perhaps something deeper, compelled her to follow. They settled beside a small reflecting pool, the water mirroring fractured images of their silhouettes. "Why did you agree to showcase here?" Roman asked without preamble. "You must have known I'd be involved in every detail." Josephine considered deflection, then decided on honesty. "Initially, because proving I could stand before you as an equal mattered. Then because declining a platform this significant would be allowing the past to dictate my future." She studied the champagne in her glass. "And perhaps because some part of me needed closure." "Is that what tonight is? Closure? Isn't that what your speech was? A public acknowledgement before you close this chapter?" Roman's laugh held no humor. "That speech was the most honest thing I've said in years." He set his untouched champagne aside. "Did you know I tried to buy your company last year?" Josephine's head snapped up. "What?" "Through a shell corporation. Your board rejected the offer without telling you. Smart people, fiercely loyal to your vision. Why would you—" "Because I missed you," he interrupted, the words emerging with surprising vulnerability. "Because watching you succeed while I became increasingly irrelevant in your life was unbearable. I thought ownership was the next best thing to having you back." Josephine felt anger flare. "I was never a possession, Roman. I know that now." He rubbed his temples, suddenly looking exhausted beneath the perfect tailoring. "I didn't understand the difference between protecting and controlling, between partnership and ownership." He gestured toward the crowd. "You've built something remarkable, Joe. Something I could never have allowed to exist if you'd stayed." The truth of his words settled between them. Her success had come precisely because she'd left, because she'd chosen the frightening wilderness, a freedom over the comfortable confinement he'd offered. "I keep that blue Valentino in my closet," Roman said suddenly. "The one you wore instead of this dress. Sometimes I look at it and try to understand what I was thinking, believing I had the right to dictate how a woman like you should present herself to the world." Josephine's carefully maintained composure wavered. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because seeing you tonight, not just the dress or the success, but the woman you've become without me, I finally understand what I destroyed." His gaze held genuine regret. "I didn't love you, Joe. I loved possessing someone extraordinary. There's a difference." The honesty between them felt both bruising and cleansing. For 2 years, Josephine had crafted her success partly as vindication, secretly hoping he would witness her triumph. Now that moment had arrived, but it felt hollow compared to this raw exchange of truths. "I should get back," she said, rising. "I have investors waiting." Roman nodded. "Of course." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "The neural interface we're launching tonight, it's based on the concept you sketched on that napkin in Bali, the one about fashion responding to emotional states." Josephine paused. "You remembered that?" "I remembered everything," he said simply. "I just never listened." She rejoined the party, professional smile firmly in place, though her mind remained by the reflecting pool. Their conversation had unearthed feelings she'd thought long resolved, not longing for Roman himself, but for the potential they might have had if he'd seen her as a partner rather than an accessory. Across the garden, Roman watched her command the room with quiet confidence. 2 years ago, he would have interpreted her success as something he'd lost control over. Tonight, he finally recognized it for what it was, something beautiful he'd never had the right to control in the first place. As midnight approached, they moved in separate orbits, connected by shared history but divided by hard-earned wisdom. Neither realized that fate would soon offer them another unexpected chapter. New beginnings. 4 months after the luminous gala, winter had transformed New York City into a glistening landscape of white and gray. Josephine hurried through Rockefeller Center, late for a meeting with potential investors for her sustainable textile initiative. Phoenix Rising had expanded beyond fashion into materials science, developing fabrics that adapted to environmental conditions. Lost in thought, she collided with someone rounding the corner. "I'm so sorry," she began, then froze. "Roman!" He looked different, his perpetually perfect appearance slightly rumpled, a scarf wrapped haphazardly around his neck, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "Josephine," his surprise seemed genuine. "I thought you were in Milan for Fashion Week." "Canceled. Production issues with the new temperature-responsive fabrics." She studied him curiously. "You're not in your usual neighborhood." "New office," he explained, gesturing to a nearby building. "We've downsized the corporate headquarters and dispersed operations to regional hubs. More sustainable, better work culture." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with the sound of holiday music and passing conversations. "How have you been?" they asked simultaneously, then laughed, a genuine moment of shared amusement that momentarily bridged the careful distance they'd maintained. "Coffee?" Roman suggested, pointing to a small cafe across the plaza. "Unless you're in a hurry." Josephine checked her watch. "I have 20 minutes. The cafe was crowded with holiday shoppers, forcing them into a small corner table. Proximity made Josephine acutely aware of how Roman had changed. Subtle lines around his eyes, a new quietness in his demeanor. "I read about your decision to decline the Morganson acquisition," she said, wrapping cold fingers around her mug. The business pages were shocked. "I imagine they were." A half-smile played at his lips. "Black Sphere making ethical considerations a priority over profit margins? Revolutionary. What happened?" Roman considered her question with unexpected thoughtfulness. "After the gala, I took some time away. 6 weeks in a cabin in Montana with no technology. Silence has a way of making certain truths unavoidable. Such as building an empire means nothing if you're the only one living in it." He met her eyes directly. "Or that controlling things doesn't bring nearly the satisfaction that connecting with them does." Josephine felt something shift between them, not the magnetic pull of their former relationship, but the tentative recognition between two people who had changed in complementary ways. "I saw your TED Talk," Roman continued, "the one about fashion as a vehicle for sustainable technology. It was brilliant." "Thank you." She hesitated. "I noticed Black Sphere's new research division is pursuing similar concepts." "With proper attribution to Phoenix Rising as the inspiration," he added quickly. "And an open collaboration offer if you're ever interested. No strings, no acquisition attempts, no control dynamics, just mutual innovation." The old Josephine would have dismissed this as another manipulation. But the woman she'd become, one who had proven herself beyond doubt, could recognize sincerity when she heard it. "I'll consider it," she said carefully. Roman nodded, accepting her boundaries without pushing. "That's all I ask." As their brief coffee neared its end, Josephine found herself studying the man across from her, not with the lingering hurt of the past or the triumph of having moved beyond him, but with fresh curiosity. The controlling billionaire who had tried to dim her light was gone. In his place sat someone who seemed genuinely engaged in his own transformation. "I have that meeting," she said, gathering her things. "But it was unexpectedly nice seeing you, Roman." He stood as she did, maintaining respectful distance. "Would it be inappropriate to ask if we might do this again sometime?" "Just coffee. Just conversation." Josephine considered his request, weighing their history against the possibility of something new. Not a rekindling of romance, but perhaps the beginning of a different kind of connection, one between equals who had each found their own path to wholeness. "I'm free next Tuesday," she said finally. "Same time?" "I'll be here," he promised. Outside, snow had begun falling again, transforming the busy plaza into something magical. They walked together to the street corner where their paths would diverge. "That dress," Roman said suddenly. "The scarlet one. It really was always yours to claim." "Yes," Josephine agreed. "But I needed to become the woman who could wear it on my own terms." Their eyes met in perfect understanding. Then, in a gesture that acknowledged both their history and the potential future, Roman extended his hand, not to possess or direct, but in simple openness. After a moment's hesitation, Josephine took it. Their handshake was brief, professional, yet held something promising, not the rekindling of an old flame, but perhaps the careful kindling of something healthier, something built on respect rather than control, admiration rather than possession. "Until Tuesday," she said, releasing his hand. "Until then," he agreed. They parted ways in the falling snow, moving in separate directions yet no longer opposing ones. Whatever might develop between them, friendship, professional collaboration, or something yet undefined, would be built on the foundation of who they had become apart, rather than who they had failed to be together. Josephine walked away with measured steps, her scarlet scarf billowing behind her like a flag of independence. The dress that had once symbolized forbidden desire now represented something far more powerful, the journey of becoming precisely who she was meant to be, answerable to no one's vision but her own. Behind her, Roman watched her go, not with the possessiveness of the past, but with appreciation for her strength and a quiet hope for what might grow between two people who had finally learned how to stand alone before choosing to stand together.